Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I see people are still trickling in, so I'm going to stretch out my introduction just to make sure we can get the most people on before we get into sort of the meat of the discussion tonight as possible. So just to introduce myself really quickly, my name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm going to be the moderator and your hearings officer tonight. I work in EGLE's Environmental Support Division. So we are here tonight to talk about an enforcement action against graphic packaging. And we're going to get into talking a little bit more about what exactly that is, what that means, and some of the process related things in a minute here. And I want to go over how things are going to work tonight, because we're going to have two sort of separate portions of the evening. So the first part of the night is going to be what we call an informational session. So in a minute, I'm going to introduce you to staff, and then we're going to do a brief presentation for you about a little bit about our process, just to give you some basic understanding, and then a little bit more information on this specific action that we have before you tonight. And then after that, we're going to open it up to question and answer from all of you. So I'll talk a little bit more about how you can get your questions on there to get them answered. And I do see that we have at least one person calling in tonight, so I'll make sure that I let you know how to raise your hand as well, if you'd like to. So that's going to be a little bit of a discussion, some give and take. We'll be able to be responding to your questions and things like that. The second part of the evening is the public hearing portion. So that is a very formalized portion of the evening where we read an opening statement. Hopefully you'll want to provide us with some comments on the action that's before you, but we won't be responding to you when you do that. So that's purely for us to make comments, to take your comments on the record. And so it's just a little bit different. And so I just want people to be aware that, because sometimes when you're giving a comment, you might ask a question and it's awkward to feel like, oh, why are they not responding? But that's why. And then that's going to start at 7 o'clock or whenever we get done answering questions, whatever comes first, or around 7. I always say 7, but sometimes we do go a little bit over, just depending on, how things are going and how many questions everybody has. So there's going to be those kind of two distinct portions of the evening. Then this is how to ask a question. So there's a couple ways for you to be able to ask a question tonight. Most of the time people will type their questions in the question box at the bottom of your screen. So we'll say Q&A. Let's go ahead and type your questions in there. Sometimes as we're going along with the presentation, maybe something comes up and it triggers like, what did they mean by that? Or maybe I missed something or whatever. So feel free to just enter those questions in as we're talking tonight. That's completely fine. And then we'll get to those questions at the question and answer portion of the night. So you can also, once we get to that Q&A part, raise your hand using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. That's going to raise your hand for us, and then we should be able to unmute you. Sometimes it doesn't work, but most of the time it works pretty well now. We've gotten a lot of the kinks worked out. And then you'll be able to just ask your questions verbally. So for people who have called in tonight, you can type #2 on your phone, and that will like digitally raise your hand for us, and we'll be able to unmute your line so you can ask a question. We're going to try to really be conscientious about folks on the phone, just because I know you can't necessarily see the slides. So we want to make sure that we're describing things appropriately for you, so you at least can get most of the gist of things. All right. So the first thing I want to do here is introduce our air quality division staff. And the first person that I want to introduce, so if my staff can turn their cameras on a minute. The first person that I want to introduce is Annette Switzer, and Annette is the Air Quality Division Director, and I know that she wanted to kind of welcome you all to the meeting tonight. So Annette, if you want to go ahead and unmute your line, I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you all for joining us tonight. As Jen said, I'm Annette Switzer, the Division Director of EGLE's Air Quality Division. I hope talking about the proposed consent order will give you some insight into the enforcement process and what we would like to do with you, what we would like to be here with you tonight. Public participation is a vital part of our work, and the input we get through this process is extremely valuable. Whether you're here to listen in or are planning to make a comment during the hearing portion of the night, the comments you provide are helpful in ensuring every aspect of the enforcement action is thoughtfully and thoroughly reviewed. Your comments will be taken under consideration when I make a decision about how we move forward with this action. And I know taking time to be with us tonight takes away from other things you may have been doing. and we'll be communicating with you all regarding the decision once it's been made. So thank you again for being here, and I'll pass it back to Jen so we can continue on.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. I appreciate you being short and sweet on that because I know folks want to get through the evening tonight. And so like Annette said, she is our decision maker. So although she'll be listening in on the whole evening tonight, she won't necessarily be participating in the discussion. But who you will be hearing from primarily is Jason Wolf. And Jason is the enforcement staff person on this case. So he is the author of the consent order as proposed before you. So he's going to be doing a lot of the presentation this evening, kind of talking through that process like I talked about. And we also have Monica Brothers, and a lot of you have probably met her before if you attended any of our other graphic packaging meetings. And she is the inspector for the facility out of our Kalamazoo district office. So she's going to be participating in that information session and sitting on the panel as well. And then we did bring Charlie Hill in. He's with our water resources division, and he works with wastewater treatment plants. So we wanted to have him here tonight just in case folks had some questions about that during the question and answer part. So not necessarily directly related to the consent order, but an important aspect as well. And then you might notice that Mike Gurney is also on the line tonight, and he is my co-host. So he's kind of helping me in the background, making sure that everything goes smoothly tonight. So thanks, Mike, for your help. I appreciate that. And then everybody besides Jason, if you guys want to go ahead and turn your cameras off and take a break until we get to the Q&A part, that's perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this information session. Like I said, Jason's going to talk a little bit about the process, and then he's going to talk about the proposed consent order. We'll get to that question and answer portion of the night where we get to have a little bit of dialogue with you, hopefully. Then we'll get to that public hearing portion where, again, just as a reminder, we don't have a lot of back and forth. It's kind of the more formal process of the night where we take your comments on the record. We'll talk a little bit about how to submit an official comment, because you do not have to do it tonight. Contrary to some popular belief, there's going to be plenty of time after this hearing tonight to be able to give us comments. So a lot of times people want to listen in, get their thoughts together, submit those comments in writing or whatever else. So we'll talk about that. Talk really briefly about where you can find other information about this proposed action in case you're interested in learning more. And then I'll give you Jason and Monica's contact information at the end in case you want to get a hold of them with other questions. So Jason, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we can get you ready for your presentation portion.
Does that look right, Jen?
That looks perfect. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right, everyone. Like Jen said, my name is Jason Wolf, and I'm with the Enforcement Unit and Air Quality Division. The Air Quality Division has many different roles in regulating air quality, but one of the primary roles is to conduct inspections of regulated facilities. These inspections make sure facilities are following air quality rules and regulations. Inspections sometimes result in a violation notice being sent to a facility. A violation notice can sometimes result in an enforcement action. The result of this enforcement action for graphics packaging will be a consent order, and is why we're having this public hearing today. Okay. A consent order is a legally binding contract between the company and the state. It contains a compliance program to resolve violations and prevent future violations. It contains a penalty amount and stipulated penalties for any future violations of the consent order. A consent order resolves all outstanding violations through a compliance plan. Once the company completes the compliance plan, the Air Quality Division considers the violations to have been resolved. This slide represents the enforcement process more visually, and you can see the public comment period is the step we're currently on for this case.
Hey, Jason, could you go back to that slide? I
Sure.
apologize for interrupting, but since we do have 4 people on the phone, do you mind just kind of going, verbally saying the steps of the process?
Yeah, so I need to move you guys a little bit here. So the steps are inspection being performed, a violation notice would have to be written, then an enforcement notice is sent out if it's referred to enforcement, and then we start having enforcement meetings with the company. And then once we reach an agreement with a proposed consent order, that's where we are now with the public comment period. And then once we respond to all the comments, we'll issue the consent order. So the violations at graphic packaging that are part of this consent order are 6 days of violation between February 2017 and May of 2019 of Rule 901. Rule 901 prohibits sources from emitting odors that unreasonably interfere with comfortable enjoyment of life and property, more generally called nuisance odors. Additionally, in November of 2020, a violation was issued for beginning construction for 2 boilers before receiving a permit. This is a violation of Rule 201, which prohibits construction without an effective permit. In this case, foundations and footings for the boilers were constructed prior to receiving the permit, which was later issued in November of 2020. So how was the penalty calculated in this case? State law sets the amount of the penalty for nuisance odors to up to $10,000 per violation per day. The penalty for these 6 violations was set at the maximum allowed by law, or $60,000. The permitting violation was calculated using EPA's penalty policy. The penalty policy sets an amount for each violation and considers factors like how long the violation occurred, the degree of cooperation from the source, and inflation. This resulted in a penalty amount of $39,270, making the total penalty for this case $99,270. The compliance plan for this consent order was developed using 2 studies, an odor study and an engineering study. Finding the sources of odor emissions from an industrial facility can often be complex. This work was done during an odor study performed in the summer of 2020, in which a consulting company was hired by Graphics Packaging to identify all significant odor sources. The final report was submitted in November of 2020. Once the sources were identified, an engineering study was done during the spring of 2021 to determine the best methods to reduce odor emissions. The final engineering report was completed in September of 2021. After the engineering report was completed, discussions with Graphics Packaging continued to determine which specific actions and timelines they would take to mitigate odors. This resulted in the submittal of a nuisance minimization plan for odors, which was required by a recent permit. The plan was approved by the Air Quality Division in August of this year. This plan describes the operational and equipment changes that have or will be completed and the data that Graphics Packaging is required to maintain to minimize odors. This slide summarizes the compliance plan for the Graphics Packaging consent order. Many of the worst odor events in the past have been linked to low oxygen levels in the wastewater clarifier. Therefore, additional treatment and monitoring is required by the consent order. Specifically, the installation of an oxygen system to maintain required oxygen levels must be installed. Also, continuous oxygen reduction potential and dissolved oxygen monitors must be installed in the clarifier. Since September of 2020, a temporary oxygen system has been in operation. A permanent oxygen system must be installed within 6 months of receiving the required City of Kalamazoo permit. In addition, currently, Graphics Packaging manually measures for both dissolved oxygen and oxygen reduction potential in the clarifier. The consent order requires that continuous monitors be installed in the clarifier, which will allow Graphics Packaging to better maintain oxygen levels to minimize odor-causing conditions. For the other sources of significant odors identified, beyond the clarifier but still part of the wastewater treatment process, the consent order requires that emissions be collected and treated using a packed bed scrubber. The consent order also requires that Graphics Packaging comply with Rule 901 and 201. This means that if there are future noncompliance with either of these rules, then additional penalties will be issued. Rule 901 refers to odor violations, and Rule 201 refers to installing equipment prior to receiving a permit. The nuisance minimization plan for odors that was required by a recent permit is also enforceable under this consent order. Again, This means that if graphics packaging fails to comply with the requirements of the plan, additional penalties will be issued. That completes the summary of the enforcement process and the proposed consent order. Now, Monica has some additional information to share.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Brothers, and I am the Air Quality Inspector for Kalamazoo County, which includes graphic packaging. Once the consent order is signed, I will be the one who makes sure that graphic packaging is following the conditions of their consent order, as well as all of the other state and federal regulations that they are subject to. I will be making sure that they are meeting the compliance timeline set forth in the order. For example, making sure that they install the permanent oxygen injection system and the scrubber in a timely manner. I will also be making sure that this equipment is maintained and operated in an appropriate manner. The nuisance minimization plan for odors outlines specific operating guidelines and monitoring and record keeping requirements that graphic packaging must follow, and I will be checking to make sure that they are doing just that. I will also continue to investigate odor complaints as they are submitted and will conduct a full facility inspection at least every other year. This doesn't mean that I can't do them more often, and sometimes we do conduct additional inspections if we feel it's necessary. If you are experiencing odors in your area, you can call me at this number. My number is 269-312-2535. During normal business hours, you can reach me at that number. If you are experiencing odors outside of normal business hours, you can call our pollution emergency alerting system, and that number is 1-800-292-4706. And I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Yeah, thank you guys. Why don't you go ahead and just leave your cameras on, and then Charlie, if you want to turn your camera on, that would be great. So we're going to get right into the question and answer part of the night. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen over yours, Jason, if you don't mind. That way folks can just see names, etc. So we did have, while you all are thinking of questions that you might have, and don't forget that if you are on the phone calling in, you're going to just press #2 to raise your hand, and then we should be able to see that that hand is raised, and you'll be able to ask your question, not answer your question. I apologize. And then if you would like, you can type your question into the question and answer box, and we can get there too. So Horst, hold on just one second. I'm going to go ahead and allow you to ask your question. All right, you should be able to unmute your line now and ask your question.
Hello, thank you for taking my question.
No problem.
I'm trying to understand what kind of process the company is using that causes the odor. Is it actually making cardboard boxes or paper or whatever?
Yeah, sure. Monica, you want to talk a little bit about what the company actually manufactures there?
Sure. Yeah, they make various thicknesses of paperboard, and they use a lot of water in that process to kind of, they use recycled paperboard, mostly in paper, recycled material. So they have to break down that material with a lot of water. And so that's why they have the wastewater treatment area of the plant, where they have the clarifier and the sludge dewatering equipment. And that's the area we were talking about with the oxygen injection system. So that's where some of the odor complaints have been linked to in the past because of those processes and all that water that they're using.
Did you have a follow-up to that, Horst, or does that help you understand?
Yeah, is this a mechanical process, or are they actually cooking the paper or the product?
They have what's called hydropulpers, where they put in the recycled material with the water. I'm not sure if it's heated during that process or not, but the water and that paper is kind of mixed together. The water does heat up in the process. And the water in the clarifier is warm, but not sure if the hydropulpers themselves are heated.
So is this a craft paper process or what?
It's not a craft mill. They don't start with wood fiber. They just use recycled paper and cardboard.
Mm-hmm. So since you're the enforcement specialist, I would like to ask you, is when this whole thing starts again in terms of the new equipment and hopefully more vigilance on the part of the company, is notice given to residents in the area, and how wide an area are we talking about in terms of from the plant to some edge?
Are you talking about the new equipment, the new paper machine that they have installed? They have already commenced operation with that. So
What
that's already been started.
What about the process we were just talking about?
Are you talking about the oxygen injection system?
The which one?
The oxygen injection system?
I believe so.
There is already a temporary oxygen injection system in place to increase the oxygen in the clarifier, and that helps to mitigate the odors.
So a lot of the things, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Horst, but I think what maybe we need some clarity on is a lot of the things that Jason talked about when he said what was included in the enforcement action are part of the nuisance minimization plan for odors. And a lot of those have already been implemented or mostly implemented. Is that true, Monica?
Yeah, they are still in the process of figuring out when they're going to install the scrubber, but that should be implemented within the next year.
So have there been any complaints or fewer complaints since this has been implemented?
Yes, I'm still getting some complaints. I haven't received any complaints that resulted in a 901 violation recently, but I am still getting some complaints from various locations around the community.
Are there any air monitors installed in the area?
So Horst, I don't want to interrupt you, but we do have some other questions that we need to get to. And we have gotten a couple other questions about the community monitors that the city has. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that. So if that's okay with you, I want to move on to a couple other questions. Is that going to be all right?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So we have gotten a couple questions about the community fence line monitors, and that obviously is not part of what we're here primarily to talk about tonight, because we want to, really focus on this enforcement action. But I do know that folks are interested in some of that and what the city has been sharing, not necessarily graphic packaging, but this is like city stuff. So Monica, I don't know if the question is, why isn't the fence line community monitoring next to the fence line community? And I don't think we have a map available right now, but we do online if folks wanted to see where those monitors are. And I know the city maintains, a real-time monitoring map. So if people are interested, that's, might be the best place to start looking. But I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Just that those monitors that are out in the community are called EnviroSuite monitors, and they have been placed by the Kalamazoo Water Reclamation Plant. So that's part of their system of hydrogen sulfide monitors. They chose the placement of those monitors. Most of the time, there's a few that are downwind, what we consider downwind, which would be, our winds are typically from the west. So we have a few of those to the east. And I know around Gull and Riverview Road, there's one. So that might have been a reasoning for their placement.
Yep. No, I think that's probably sufficient for at least for this conversation tonight. There was just another question about your inspections. You mentioned that we're required to do inspections every other year, but you are almost always going out more often than that. And you do complaint investigations whenever we get complaints, which do a lot of times involve an on-site visit where you're doing inspections a part of it. So that's just, I think what Monica was saying there is, EPA requires us to go out at least every other year, but we always go out more often than that. So we just wanted to kind of here's the bar. And then, we're always kind of doing more, especially with a facility that we are working through an enforcement action with. And then I don't think that you said this, but the question was, why are the inspections announced? So we don't do announced inspections. We do unannounced inspections, which means we don't let the company know we're on our way there for inspections. We show up, knock on the door and say, hey, we're here for an inspection. So I'm sorry if that was kind of misunderstood there. And then I did have a couple other questions. We don't really have the right staff to talk about exposure levels and things like that. So I know people have some questions about some of the recent testing and things like that. So I apologize. We don't have the right staff online right now for that. But if you do put questions in the chat about those kinds of things, we will get the right staff to respond back to you. So I apologize that we don't have the right staff on for that. We just, want to make sure that we're focusing on the consent order and the enforcement action tonight. All right, so we had a couple other questions I want to get to here. All right, sorry, give me 1 second. So this one's going to be for you, Jason. So in the consent order, in paragraph 20, it specifically says that graphic packaging agrees not to contest the legal basis, but reserves the right to dispute the factual basis of stipulated fines. And the question is, can graphic packaging challenge the fine and the nuisance minimization plan for odors, or is that not a possibility? So I don't know if you could respond a little bit to that.
Sure. So what a stipulated fine is, it's a fine that would be issued after the effective date of the consent order, meaning a violation occurred after the consent order is active, and then we would issue a fine. And what that paragraph is talking about is, because of this negotiation, the company has agreed to the amount. Now, if the company wanted to dispute the facts or the underlying violation, they could try to fight that through court. But the amount of the penalty, they could not argue, because that's already been, negotiated and agreed to. If for some reason we wrote a violation that they felt was, wrong or incorrect, they could, in effect, fight that part of it, but they just can't fight the amount. So that's what that paragraph talks about.
Okay, no, thank you. And I'm going to ask you this question as well. So there was a question that came in that requested, why can't the consent order, or can the consent order request that graphic packaging do additional fence line monitoring to include volatiles or H2S or things like that? Is that something that would be a good comment to add to the consent order?
Yeah, that's a good comment, and we can definitely take that back to the company.
Okay, another question here. Is there a possibility, and this I think kind of goes along with that question, is there a possibility that the consent order or the nuisance minimization plan for odors can include the requirement that graphic packaging provide publicly available graphs of odor emission data, including more EnviroSuite sensors potentially, or whatever the sensors that are being installed around the clarifier or other areas around the facility property? Is that another, possibility, something else that could be a comment or something else we would be willing to take back to the company?
Yeah, definitely. That's something, we could talk to the company about, if their willingness to make that, especially the EnviroSuite data, publicly available. We can definitely have a conversation with them.
Yep, there's certainly a precedent for that in other facilities around the state. So that would be a great comment for people to have. So when I'm prompting, like, that would be a good comment. So remember, this is the question and answer portion. So these don't necessarily, although we're hearing them and we'll take them into consideration, official comments like this are really helpful for us to be able to make adjustments to the consent order as written and things like that. So just kind of wanted to caveat that a little bit so people are understanding why I'm weirdly talking about that. So the other question is, I'm sorry, just kind of trying to forward read this. So what effect might the upcoming health consultation report that's coming from the state health department have on EGLE's consent order relevant to any odor monitoring or mitigation at graphic packaging? So if based on that health consultation, further action is warranted, would the consent order create a possibility of some kind of double jeopardy that might preclude further action? And Jason, I'm going to have you answer that one, but just before you go into that, for folks who may not be aware, in past meetings that we've had with a lot of you in the community and some of our other stakeholders, we have done talked about a lot of the sampling that was done by EPA, that was done by EGLE, that was done by the state health department. And based on all of that monitoring and sampling information, the state health department is putting together a health consultation, and they have informed the city of Kalamazoo and us that that's going to be forthcoming sometime soon. And I don't know what sometime soon is. That could be, a month or 6 months, but it's definitely in the work. So that's what they're talking about when they're asking this question. So Jason, I probably talked too long for you to remember what the actual question was. So let me know if you need me to repeat.
No, well, the short answer to your question is no, there's no risk of double jeopardy here. This consent order is resolving nuisance odor violations, and the Department of Health Council, that's not the purpose of it. It's to determine, potential health impacts. And, so there's no way that this consent order would restrict any further action.
Okay.
Because of that.
Perfect. Then another question here, this is shifting gears a little bit. So this is talking about, you mentioned this in the very beginning of your presentation about the way, and kind of a little bit of like why this enforcement action maybe took so long is because they did the odor study and then they did the engineering study. And that was where a lot of these recommendations came from that we incorporated into the enforcement action and things like that. So the question says, Graphic Packaging's third-party odor study that you had talked about presented capping off the clarifier, which we talked about earlier, was definitely one of the sources of odors that was identified as an option to mitigate and reduce those odors. So this option was rejected by Graphic Packaging for a lot of different reasons. And the person asking the question, says they understand that there's sound engineering behind why it wouldn't be the number one option. But if all these things happen and we're still getting a lot of odors and we can still identify the clarifier as a source of those odors, is capping the clarifier a possibility, or could that be something that's incorporated into some further action that EGLE does? So Jason, I wanted you, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit, but then I would like Charlie,
Sure.
because he is a wastewater treatment specialist, to kind of chime in on that as well.
Yeah, from an enforcement perspective, absolutely. I mean, if non-compliance is continuing out there, then all reasonable options would be back on the table, and that definitely would be one of them.
So Charlie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think early in or previously in Jason's presentation, he talked about some of the compliance strategies and what they're working on and where some of those efforts are focused. I think primarily on odor prevention, right, through process monitoring and optimization. And then there was mention too of this oxygen system that can help mitigate any odors that are starting to develop in that clarifier. But technically, it is feasible to cover and kind of trap or capture any odors and then address those, whether it's through some kind of a scrubber system or what have you. But really, I think the focus is on preventing those odors, and then if they're starting to develop, mitigating them before they really cause a problem. So that's where the focus is now.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. This question is going to go back to you, Jason, and it's about calculating the penalty. And we had received other comments that, the $99,000 is not a high enough amount of money to charge this company for what has gone on. So I'm just going to read it because I think it is valuable, comment to make and a valuable question. So why is the fine so low given the value of health impact per person cost and the city's reputational loss and damage? You state an initial fine was calculated using the US EPA Clean Air Act, stationary source civil penalty policy, and Michigan civil fine statutory authority. The penalty policy takes into account several factors, including actual or possible harm caused by the violations, the number and length of time of the violations, importance to the regulatory scheme, and the size of the violators. So I know you broke this down a little bit in the beginning, and I don't know if you can parse out a little bit more about Rule 901 and how, that's that's the sticking point, I think. So if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Kind of a unique situation where the Rule 901 is what's called a state-only rule, meaning it's not federally enforceable, basically meaning EPA could not take action on that type of violation. Therefore, the penalty is calculated using state law. And state law limits the amount of penalty for those types of violations to $10,000 per violation per day. So that's where each of those violations were set at the maximum of 10,000. The other violation, the 201 violation, the permitting violation, is something that's federally enforceable, and therefore the EPA penalty policy was applied to that violation and took into account several of the factors that were mentioned. And that's how we got the total penalty amount. So that's how it was, the sum of those two was our total penalty.
Yeah, and I think that this is a theme sometimes when we have 901 violations, and we definitely try our best to get the maximum penalty we can. And it usually feels to community that it's not enough. And so we do appreciate you bringing that up for sure. The question was, why are you using 901 instead of the Clean Air Act? These odors contain toxic gases. So, and we can talk a little bit about that, but 901 is our rule that we use when we have odor issues. And I know Monica, I think she's talked a little bit about how odors are assessed when we get complaints like that. But Monica, I would like you, if you don't mind, to kind of talk about how you do those odor investigations and a little bit about maybe the challenges of assessing whether or not a violation for odors occurs, that along with the things that you look at when from a compliance perspective during an inspection and how that might be a little bit different.
Sure. So when I get an odor complaint, I will go out to the residence or area that the complaint was made, and we assess odors by frequency, intensity, and duration. And so I will try to determine on a 0 to 5 scale how intense the odors are, and stick around for a while to see how long those odors last, if they kind of come and go with the wind, or if they're always present for a certain amount of time. And if they are intense enough and last long enough, that would be considered a violation of Rule 901. So we determine compliance a bit differently when we do inspections, where we will take a facility tour, look at the stacks, see if there are any visible emissions coming from the stacks other than steam. We will also, if we smell odors that are unusual, we will try to trace those back during the inspection as well. But we also look at records. The facilities keep records of the materials that they use, the different chemicals that they use, and sometimes these are associated with permit emission limits. So they have to do calculations based on their usage of certain chemicals, or based off of sometimes combustion sources like boilers and emergency generators. So we'll take a look at those calculations as well and make sure that they are all under the emission limits in their permit.
Yeah, it's definitely a different thing. And 901 can be a frustrating thing. Odors can be a frustrating thing for us too. And we have to follow the guidelines that we have when issuing violations with them. But I appreciate, Monica, how you tied that back into, we're also making sure that the other compliance aspects of the permits that do limit those emissions are really looked at and evaluated and reviewed on a very regular basis, because we know we need to stay on top of that as well. So this question is an interesting one, Jason. I'm going to send this to you because I think what we really need to maybe talk about here is stipulated penalties and what that means and how those can be part of the deterrent for re-violating. So the question is, this company makes a lot of money every year, and I don't, the asker, quote $7 billion, and that may or may not be true. But they make a lot of money. They're a big corporation. So how does a $99,000 penalty really deter the company from continuing to violate? And I think that's why we incorporate stipulated penalties into enforcement actions. But I don't know if you can talk a little bit maybe about some sort of general examples of how that has been put into effect in other cases in the past, and basically how those stipulated penalties work.
Well, like I said, stipulated penalties are something that if continued noncompliance happens after the enforcement action would be issued. And I can just say that there are cases in the past that stipulated penalties rack up very quickly, and it's it's the money, but it's also the kind of visual aspect of a company being continuing violation and continually getting fined. The company doesn't want to pay the money and doesn't want the negative exposure. At the same time, if noncompliance continues for any duration, us collecting fines isn't really the goal. The goal is to stop the violations. And at a certain point, we would take a different action to, figure out solutions to stop the noncompliance. So that's really the end goal. It's not to necessarily penalize them out of business, but it's to stop the noncompliance.
Yep, thank you for that. A quick question here was, does EGLE recognize the North Side in Kalamazoo as a disadvantaged community? And I would say, yes, we do. Based on our draft Michigan environmental justice screening tool, it is definitely recognized as an environmental justice area. And I believe, and I couldn't quote this exactly, and Monica, if you know specifically, let me know. But if my recollection is correct, EPA's environmental justice screening tool also recognizes that community as an underrepresented community as well. So thank you for just acknowledging that. We appreciate that. So this is an interesting question. I'm not sure if we'll have an answer to it, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. And it says, does EGLE put the burden on EPA when applicable or the city to impose violations and reject the consent order for this one? And I think that's what you mean on that. And I'm extrapolating a little bit. What are EGLE's recommendations to the city and community to better stop the repeated violations and disregard for fines, given the length of time DHHS is taking with the health consult and the possible justifications for class action by human beings and the city impacted? So we definitely can't we can't speak to a class action lawsuit. I mean, that's something that community members would have to determine on their own if that's something that they would want to pursue. We do partner with EPA on a lot of things like this, not necessarily this enforcement case, although we do have enforcement cases where we do partner with EPA. And just to remind folks, throughout the process of us inspecting and writing violations to graphic packaging, since kind of this whole thing started, or, really was ramping up when Monica became involved and we started getting a lot of complaints, we have included EPA, we've included the state health department, we've included ATSDR, which I'm not going to remember what that stands for, of course, off the top of my head. Association of, anyways, don't make me do it. I'll get it to you if you're interested. But we've done that purposefully because this is a big deal to all of the agencies. And I know the health department has taken a while with their health consultation, and I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like based on our conversation, that's because they want to make it as robust as possible and make sure that community is getting the answers that they need and that the review is done and those evaluations are done with community in mind and making sure that we're not missing anything. So I know that it has taken a while, and I can't really apologize for that, but it's definitely something that I know folks are waiting for. And based on what we know, the health department will be putting that out as soon as they can. So it's definitely something that we always ask. And I know that in my experience working for EGLE for a long time and being in Monica's role as an inspector for quite a while and working with cases, especially with odors, I know that the health department has acknowledged in their community when they participated in our community update meeting that odors aren't only an odor. They can definitely cause people to have stress and other things in their lives that wouldn't be there if it wasn't for that. So but I also know that complainants and folks in the community can kind of get complaint fatigue where they feel like they're constantly complaining and things aren't happening. but we do urge you, if you are experiencing odors, to continue to call us. Please let Monica know. Thank you, Marta. I appreciate that. So the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, I appreciate that. I don't know why that's just an acronym. We always talk in acronyms. That doesn't stick in my head appropriately, so I apologize for that. That was the other agency that we've been partnering with very thoroughly. So you know, that's a step that you can take. I mean, community advocacy is definitely a thing that we've seen help in other cases for sure. So, you know, if folks feel strongly about that, you know, we certainly wouldn't discourage that from happening either. So this question is related to a recent release of waste from GPI, from graphic packaging, into the Kalamazoo River. And the question is, are there any adjustments being made to this fine? So as you probably expected, those are two different things. We don't have staff on necessarily tonight to talk about that release. I'm not sure exactly what's going to be happening with that as far as community outreach goes. But when we have those kinds of situations, we don't necessarily combine anything with this consent order. And this consent order and this action is already in the works. It's already out for comment. So we don't typically stop that action and include something else. And it's just a different part of our department, and they would kind of be taking their own sort of, I know it is frustrating that it's not coordinated. Sometimes things are coordinated, but especially this, because it happened afterwards, you know, after the kind of air quality things are already in the works, it wouldn't be something that we would necessarily coordinate together. That being said, EGLE as a whole discusses actions going on at graphic packaging. It's definitely something that we cross media with. So we talk to, like, that's why we have Charlie here today, because we talk with our water resources division folks. We talk with our waste, we don't call them waste management, our materials management folks. When things like this happen, we talk with our remediation folks when things like this happen. So we keep everybody in the loop, and we do try to coordinate when we can, but our enforcement processes typically run either parallel paths or separately, and don't always coalesce in one sort of enforcement action. So I know that's kind of one of those things that can be pretty frustrating. This is a question, Monica, I don't know if you can talk about this a little bit. And I know we've talked about the topography of Kalamazoo in general in the past, but the question is, you know, how does the topography of Kalamazoo sort of affect how people might be experiencing maybe stronger odors or more odors than, you know, if the topography was flat in that area? So I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So sometimes in low-lying areas, especially near like rivers, it's typically in a valley area. What can happen is inversions. So especially this time of year, you can see inversions happen overnight, which can trap colder air towards the surface. And this usually only lasts for the morning hours, because by the time the sun rises, the air starts mixing more, and that inversion layer kind of breaks. But sometimes you may experience more odors because of that in the morning hours.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happens. And we see that even inversions in the winter time, which seems strange because you would think sometimes in the summer that humidity would be keeping the air down, but inversions a lot of times happen in the fall or when cooler weather starts occurring too. So, all right. So thank you for that. Just want to make sure we don't have any other questions coming in. All right, hold on for 1 second here. So this is an interesting question, and I appreciate you asking this. So the question is, what would EGLE consider a threshold for shutting down a company like graphic packaging when violation fines like this one don't stop and the violations get repeated? And we had this question at another recent hearing, and it is an answer that I don't like to give because I know it's extremely frustrating for people to hear, but there is not a threshold. There is not a number. Sometimes we wish there was, but our regulatory authority, our rules do not define anything like that. There's no like concrete thing. Once you pass this threshold, that can happen. And I know that's an extremely frustrating thing for communities to hear. I think I would like to just go back and emphasize something that Jason talked about earlier today. And it's just, you know, our real goal is to make sure that community is not experiencing things like these odors. And so going through this process, although it can be cumbersome, it can take a lot longer than we want at times. There is not a threshold necessarily that we have to shut a company down. The threshold really is that there has to be an imminent, immediate risk to health. So we have had some circumstances like that relatively recently. There was a company in Belding that made chlorine tablets, and they had a fire, and there was like an imminent danger to people, like an immediate danger. So in this case, you know, the things that we did with doing the sampling and the monitoring and involving the health department and EPA and ATSDR in those conversations were to establish what are the risks here. So like I said, I know it's a very, very frustrating answer. And so I wouldn't blame anybody for being, you know, frustrated by that for sure. So I don't know that the question is, could the health department recommend that EGLE shut a company down? That's not, without getting into logistics of how sort of that works, that wouldn't necessarily be how we would do it. So the question was, when asthma related deaths are linked to a zip code, would DHHS, would the state health department recommend EGLE shut a company down? Is it EGLE's decision? So in that case, it would not be our decision. We wouldn't have the authority to do that based on health risks like that. So it would, you know, it's definitely something that the state health department may be able to chime in on, and we can definitely connect you with the folks that are working on this case if that would be helpful. So if the person who asked the question wants to type in the question box, that would be helpful, we can definitely do that. Not a problem at all. I know they're more than happy to speak with people on that. Okay, so these are great questions. Again, I know Annette mentioned this before, but we really do appreciate folks taking the time out of their night to come and talk to us and ask these hard questions, and hopefully get some answers and then be able to make comments on this draft enforcement action. Give you guys just another couple minutes for sure, make sure there's no other questions coming in, and then we can get to the hearing portion of the night. Okay, well, I think what we're going to do is shift over to the hearing portion of the night. So thank you so much to my panelists for participating tonight. Greatly appreciate that. Annette, I'm going to invite you to turn your camera back on as we move into this portion. So just as a reminder, it gets a little bit, and I apologize for this, but I do have to sort of read kind of a dry statement to start the hearing portion. But just to remind you that this part of the night is going to be a part of the night where we aren't responding to your questions. So Annette and I are going to be listening to your comments. We're going to be taking, Annette will probably be taking notes. She'll be listening to all the comments that you make and using them as part of her decision when she works with Jason on finalizing this consent order. So I'm going to go ahead and read the statement to you. And I apologize, I know it's kind of dry, but it's just a formal part of opening the hearing. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I will be serving as the hearing officer for this public hearing on the draft administrative consent order for Graphic Packaging International LLC, hereinafter referred to as Graphic Packaging, located in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Annette Switzer, Division Director of EGLE's Air Quality Division, is the decision maker for this administrative consent order. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on human health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. We are here tonight to receive your comments on the draft consent order. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in this draft consent order for Graphic Packaging an opportunity to provide information the Air Quality Division can use in deciding whether to approve the consent order as written, or if there are additional issues to be considered. Please recognize that EGLE can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria EGLE must use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within EGLE's authority. In addition, some of you may want to express your support or opposition to the draft consent order. And while we'll be happy to make note of your position, please understand that EGLE is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the enforcement action. Please note the proposed terms of the draft consent order are brought to you tonight in the form of a draft agreement. This does not mean that a decision has already been made. Instead, it reflects an initial agreement in which Graphic Packaging must pay a monetary penalty, abide by a compliance plan, and pay additional penalties if compliance is not maintained. Everything in the draft consent order remains open for comment and further consideration by the department. We look forward to your comments on those issues. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information EGLE will consider in making its decision on the draft consent order. The public comment period for the proposed consent order will end at midnight on December 9, 2022. Additional information can be submitted until then and will be considered when EGLE makes a decision. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision on the consent order will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may reject the consent order, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft consent order, if any, have been changed in the final consent order and the reasons for those changes. In all three of these scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended either the informational session or the public hearing will be directly notified of the decision. As stated previously, you may submit a comment at any time to the email address or phone number that we will provide. You can also type the word comment into the question box and submit your comment in writing. If you do not want me to read your comment, please state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I will unmute your line so you can speak. We will limit your comment time to 3 minutes, and I'll do my best to address commenters in the order your hands are raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have some challenges with that. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed consent order and to listen to those comments. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will now begin calling the names of those who indicate they would like to make a statement. So just a reminder, if you would like to make a comment tonight, you can raise your hand using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. I know we do have folks calling in. I would like to welcome you to also make a comment, and you can raise your hand by clicking #2 on your phone, and that will raise your hand so that I can see that you would like your line unmuted to be able to make a comment. Okay. All right, so I am going to call the first person. Oh, and I did want to just say, based on your phone number, since I can't see your name, I will call out the last 4 digits of your phone number as they show up on my screen. I know for me, I sometimes don't remember my phone number. I might remember everybody's in my family's, but I don't remember mine. So just, be cognizant of that. That's how I will call your name. So the first person that I want to call is Audrey Seilheimer, and I'm not sure if I am pronouncing your name right. So if you could please state your name for the record and then go ahead with your comment whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Audrey Seilheimer. I'm a mother of 2 and a resident in Kalamazoo. I wanted to state that Dr. David Ansel, a physician and social epidemiologist, who is a senior vice president in charge of community health equity at Rush University Medical Center, has said that air quality in the 49007 zip code is below the US average and is the worst of all Kalamazoo neighborhoods based on hazardous air pollutant measurements from the EPA National Air Toxics Assessment. A November 2020 Rush University Medical Center presentation, he gave detailed air quality and respiratory disease as he tracked it in the data in Kalamazoo's 49007 zip code, pointing to disparities when compared with other parts of the city. The zip code has the most asthma prevalence in the region, he said, and he also said that section of the city has the highest hospitalization rates for asthma in Kalamazoo. The asthma rates in 49007 zip code are 5 times higher than those seen in the nearby 49008 zip code up the hill in Kalamazoo Valley. Ansel began investigating those health disparities in Kalamazoo after he was contacted about the issue by a former resident of the city's North Side neighborhood. And the 49007 zip code includes the North Side neighborhood, downtown, parts of the Vine and Stewart neighborhoods of Kalamazoo. If someone has asthma for 30 years, an approximate cost per year for their medical care is $3,100 at a minimum, which equates to about $93,000 over 30 years if they are alive that long. The median household income for the North Side is estimated to be $27,000 per year, according to Best Neighborhood Household Income studies. And given that graphic packaging holding revenue for the last 12 months ending September 30th of 2022 was $9.42 billion, a 32.58% increase year over year. I disagree with this order in terms of the fine and do not consent that it is enough of a fine as tabulated given the measurements you've explained in this meeting this evening. Thank you for being here.
Audrey, thank you so much for your comment. We do really appreciate it. The next person I'm going to call is Brandy Crawford Johnson. So Brandy, you should be able to go ahead and make your comment whenever you're ready.
This is Brandy Crawford Johnson, environmental justice activist who developed severe asthma from living in Kalamazoo's fence line community after only 8 years of toxic exposures from Graphic Packaging International. My in-laws and friends are also sick with severe respiratory disease and cancer from legacy pollution and toxic air and odor emissions from Graphic Packaging International. They also face a 14-year death gap. The North Side's environmental justice scores in the 90th percentile and has one of the highest asthma hospitalization and cancer rates in the nation. GPI is $1 billion corporation. Do you think $99,270 and some minor changes will stop Graphic Packaging from poisoning our community in Kalamazoo? No, it won't. Right after you came to an agreement with GPI and enforcement for past air violations, they had a toxic spill in the river and more Clean Air Act violations. GPI started their expansion without an air permit because EGLE doesn't scare them enough to follow the regulations. They think EGLE is their buddy because you allow them to pollute our community without consequences for decades. You let them increase pollution with the expansion. You let them double their diesel truck traffic with the expansion, and that further harms the health of the Kalamazoo's predominantly African-American community. This enforcement agreement should include relocation costs for the residents living next door to this toxic plant. This is toxic odor, not odor from a trash can. GPI's toxic releases are in the tons per toxin per year. This enforcement agreement should include millions in fines for being in non-compliance for decades, which resulted in thousands of illnesses and deaths. Environmental racism is real in Kalamazoo, and EGLE's eyes are wide open to it. You say zoning isn't considered an enforcement, but you are well aware this is a red line community that says hazardous to Negroes on the Kalamazoo zoning maps. I've sent them to you. I've sent you a toxicology report showing the severe health risks to our community employees at GPI. You also know Kalamazoo is a valley that traps the pollution. You have hundreds of error complaints filed against graphic packaging every single year. You also are aware that I am in an informal resolution agreement with EPA, ECRCO for EGLE, violating our civil rights by issuing graphic packaging a permit to expand to increase pollution and your lack of enforcement. You have to know I would not think this enforcement agreement is acceptable to resolve our civil rights complaint or protect my community. I've had Zoom meetings with almost every single one of you at EGLE for years, and you know what is needed to make our community whole again. None of us deserve to get sick by the non-compliant actions of GPI, your lack of enforcement, and horrible permitting decisions. Environmental justice is at the forefront of the Biden administration after years of injustice in disadvantaged communities like ours. You better start stepping up your enforcement. Start considering health impacts to humans and the environment before permitting polluters. You are not an economic development agency. You are an environmental and human health protection agency under the umbrella of the EPA. I'm speaking on behalf of the entire environmental justice community in Kalamazoo. EGLE put their health first. GPI should relocate our vulnerable and sick residents away from their sacrifice zone. GPI should provide medical monitoring and treatment of our residents. Revoking GPI's permits for their long history of non-compliance with the law is what is needed. Human health and the environment is at risk, and we don't want GPI in Kalamazoo harming any more generations of our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. We do appreciate your comments. So the next person I'm going to call is a call-in number with the last 4 digits of 2555. So if you give me just a second here, I should be able to.
Hello, my name is.
Oh, thank you. Yep,
Hello?
we can hear you. Sorry, go right ahead. I apologize. I didn't mean to talk over you. Go ahead and say your name and start your comment.
My name is Deanne Winfield. My son's name is DeAndre Jones. He's here at my home on the life support machine. We live across the street from graphic packaging, and the smell gives you headaches, make your eyes burn. It do all kinds of stuff to us. Our asthma has gotten 100 times worse. I have lost my daughter. She passed away from a severe asthma attack. I don't think the fine of $99K is enough, and all we want to do is be relocated. So I'm asking y'all to please listen to what we're saying. These are our lives. My son don't have much time left. Please let him enjoy the rest of the time that he has. Help us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ms. Jones. I'm going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to see if anyone else would like to make a comment tonight. And just like we had mentioned previously, you do not have to make a comment tonight. If you'd like to make one, there's still plenty of time to do that. Okay, so Julie Rogers, if you would like to go ahead and unmute your line and you state your name for the record and then start your comment as soon as you're ready.
Hello, my name is Alexi Chapin-Smith, and I work for State Representative Julie Rogers. I just wasn't able to change my name on the display name. But Representative Rogers would like to make a comment for the record, and I will read it for you here. As the City of Kalamazoo's state representative, I am glad to see EGLE taking action to safeguard people who live in the areas impacted by emissions from graphic packaging. I do have concerns to raise on behalf of my constituents, as many of them have reached out to my office with concerns. First, this process has not moved fast enough to serve the people living in this area. EGLE has received over 150 odor complaints about this plant since 2017, and has issued multiple violations over many years. This proposed consent order would require graphic packaging to install equipment a year from now to address problems for which they received multiple violation notices more than 5 years ago. The timelines in the consent order, 180 days, the end of March 2023, and the end of December 2023, should be revised to reflect the urgency of addressing this problem. I'm also concerned because graphic packaging has continued to incur violations after the period covered by this proposed consent order, including a discharge into the Kalamazoo River. This raises a question of whether they are willing and able to comply with the terms of the proposed order and Rules 901 and 201. In order to ensure compliance, I urge EGLE to place graphic packaging on a program of much more frequent monitoring and inspections. The fine in the consent order should be adjusted upwards to reflect both the habitual nature of the violations and the increased inspection, monitoring, and enforcement costs necessary to ensure cooperation with the order. As a legislator, the people of my district are my top priority. I hope you will place their well-being at the center of your deliberations as you finalize this order. Sincerely, Julie M. Rogers, Representative 60th District.
Thank you so much for reading Rep. Rogers's comment. We do appreciate that for sure. Okay, I'm just going to give everybody just a second here to see if there is any other comments coming in. We did have one comment that came in through the chat box. So I'm just going to read that out loud for the record. It says, if there is an odor, there must be a chemical. Testing the water, air, and air should prove what the odor is. GPI's track record and ability to defy orders is not good. Please do something. So thank you very much for that comment. We do appreciate that as well. Just want to make sure everybody has time to make a comment if they would like to tonight. So I'm going to give you, just a couple more minutes, maybe not a couple more minutes, another minute or so. How about that?
Hey, Jen, if I could just make a reminder, if you are on the phone and you do want to raise your hand, that's pound or the hash sign, and then the number 2.
Yep.
So just a reminder if you're on the phone to do that if you'd like to make a comment.
Yep. Thanks so much, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay, Annette, I'm not seeing any more comments. Are you okay with me closing the hearing down? Okay, thank you. So in order to close the hearing, I just need to read a brief statement to officially close it, and then we'll get to the other few things that we wanted to chat about tonight. So thank you so much for your comments and your cooperation tonight. We really do appreciate your interest in the draft consent order for graphic packaging, especially the time you took to be here tonight. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period ends on December 9th, 2022. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed, so thank you again. Just a couple things to talk about with regard to sending us other comments in, finding other information. So I've been emphasizing that this is not your only opportunity to make a comment. So if you listened tonight and you just weren't ready to make a comment, that's completely acceptable. Please feel free to take advantage of sending Jason something in the mail if you'd like by the 9th. And I'll just, because we do have quite a few people on the phone, hopefully have a pencil and maybe a piece of paper to jot this down. But that can be sent to Jason Wolf at EGLE, and EGLE is EGLE. And then it's the Air Quality Division, or you can just put AQD. And then the address there is PO Box 30260, and it's Lansing, Michigan. And then the zip code for that is 48909. If you have access to email, you can just send Jason an email and just make sure, put graphic packaging comment in the subject line. And his email is wolfj2@Michigan.gov. So it's WO, L as in Larry, F as in Frank, J, the number 2, and it's at Michigan, all spelled out, and it's .gov as in government. Or maybe the easiest way, especially for folks who are calling in tonight, if you'd like to call our public comment voicemail box and just leave us a voicemail, make sure you say that this is about graphic packaging so we know for sure. But that number is 517-284-0900. And so we had mentioned a few times that we would be notifying you of what happens. But if you're interested in all and kind of following what's going on, you can always go to our webpage, and it's Michigan.gov /EGLEAirPublicNotice, and EGLEAirPublicNotice is all one word. On there, you can find all the open public comment periods for air quality division related things, air quality related things. So regular air permits, enforcement actions like we're talking about tonight, rules, toxic screening levels. So abundance of different kinds of information is on there if you're interested in any of that. On that EGLE Air Public Notice page, you can find links to the consent order, the enforcement action, and on there you're going to find the proposed consent order that we brought before you tonight. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it and you're interested, it is a legal document. So we've also created this proposed enforcement fact sheet that's just a little bit higher level look at what exactly the consent order is asking the company to do. And then there's also an enforcement summary that's kind of in the middle of both of those. So if folks are interested in kind of digging a little deeper into this, or you want to find out some more information before you actually give us your comment, that would be a great way to do that. Hold on one second, Audrey, and I will unmute you. Yes, there you go. You should be able to ask your question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to know if you will be publishing a copy of this webinar, of
Yes.
this hearing, so the public can review the playback.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do with all of these, so if you're interested in anything related to air quality, public comments, or water, or any other actions that have gone on virtually like this, the place that we put that, and I think Mike may have put this in the chat for you. Oh no, it's the air quality public notice. So thank you for doing that. Is on our YouTube channel. So Mike, I don't know if you can share a link to our YouTube channel. It's just YouTube and it's Michigan EGLE. And there's actually a playlist for air quality public notice. And so this will be the one on the top. Most likely it will be posted on Monday, I would say. Probably not tomorrow, but it's possible. We try to get those up like as soon as we possibly can. And the reason is we get all of them transcribed so that if we have folks who are English as a second language, but they do read in another language, they can change that transcription language to be translated. And it's not perfect, but it is helpful, you know, at times for folks. So yes, we'll definitely do that. We will be sending you guys all, we have your email address, and if we don't have your email address and you want to give us your email address, if you're on the phone, you can give even that, you know, send Jason an email and just say, hey, I want to be included on the list, or anything like that. Get a hold of us and let us know that you want to be included on that email list. So we will be emailing out some follow-up, which will include this recording of this and where to find more information. Again, that public comment period stops on the 9th. So a little bit of like, what's the next steps for this, right? So we talk a little bit about like, hey, Annette's going to look at all the comments. Jason's going to look at all the comments. So once the 9th comes, we start looking at those comments. We typically create a document called a response to comments document, which goes through, these were the comments we got, these are changes that were made to the agreement or not made to the agreement, depending on what it is. And then we also will share that with you. So that will come sometime in the future. That does sometimes take a little bit. So you'll get a couple different pieces of information shared with you. Usually we do that electronically, but again, if you don't have access to email, please don't hesitate to call Monica. And we will get you that information. You know, we have the ability to mail it to you or whatever you need, or we can talk to you about it, whatever you need as far as that goes. So again, on the screen right now, I just wanted to share Monica's contact information, especially her phone number for folks. So her phone number is 269-312-2535. And again, that pollution emergency number, if you didn't catch that before, is 800-292-4706. So yeah, feel free to get a hold of us if you have questions about the hearing tonight, questions about the draft consent order that you might read later. We are definitely happy to walk you through that or answer those to the best of our ability. I know I did have some folks asking questions we weren't able to answer tonight because we just don't have the right staff on. We'll definitely be getting a hold of folks to be able to respond to you. It might not be immediately, so I just want to, put that out there, but we will be passing that forward for you as well. So with that, I think that we will go ahead and just thank you all for coming tonight. I mean, we really do appreciate the time. As Annette said in the beginning, we know there's probably other things that you would rather be doing with your evening. So when folks take the time to, sit down with us for an hour and a half or so, we do really appreciate it. And it does help our process. It does help our consent orders and our permits and all of those things be better. So with that, I will let you all go. And I, again, appreciate you being with us tonight. And if you have any questions, just please reach out. So thanks a lot again for your time.